A good step towards a collaboration as one people, as wise as one family.
We used to be a US church with satellites in different parts of the world. Now we'll become a truly global church where we relate to each other on a more equal level.
We are a beautiful, diverse, international, worldwide church, and the regionalization plan is a reflection of what that looks like.
Today, we have taken a journey whereby every region within our church will be on the same level.
We don't want anybody to be at the center except for our Lord Jesus Christ, and all of us will exist with total equity, sharing the gifts and the resources that we may offer to each other.
The affirmative has it, and the motion is adopted.
Delegates without debate passed an end to a 40-year-old ban on self-avowed practicing homosexuals from being clergy.
We passed the removal of this ban on gay clergy with an overwhelming 93% affirmative vote, a signal of a new period of unity in our church.
We have more traditional people, we have more progressive people, we have people with different views, but we're open to everyone. And now we are truly open to everyone. It's an exciting day for the United Methodist Church.
To me, this is just a reflection of the truth about the church that I've always known.
It is a day of celebration, a day that I have a sense of peace and of joy.
Maybe for the first time when we say open hearts, open minds, open doors, we are consistent with our message. Like, we really mean it this time.
This has really been a 12-year effort to revise these social principles, and our goal, as directed by the General Conference, was to make them more concise, more theologically grounded, and reflective of our worldwide denomination as we begin this next chapter of United Methodism.
I have felt a real sense of our commitment to personal holiness and social holiness.
We're serious about helping people come to find Christ, to know Christ, and then to go live out their faith in the world in a way that sees the kingdom of God come on earth as it is in heaven.
It was an amazing undertaking.
People all over the church and the world have been working on it.
Well, we're really excited to have a completely brand new judicial council who can help walk us through the process of regionalization. We're also very excited that we've been able to enter into an official communion agreement with the Episcopal Church. We're also working on our commitment to Christian unity and reconciliation by developing an official agreement to create an apology on behalf of the United Methodist Church for our involvement in the overthrow of the Hawaiian monarchy. We also just passed the smallest budget in the history of the General Conference. The U.S. jurisdictions have agreed to no elections for the time being, and a total of 32 U.S. bishops allocated across the jurisdictions. And deacons finally have sacramental authority in ministry contexts.
Calendar item number 554 is adopted. This is an historic moment.
We are registering people for the General Conference.
I am a marshal.
I'm here on an official monitoring for GCOS row.
I'm serving as a translator and interpreter for Portuguese and English.
Clergy delegate from the Mountain Sky Conference.
I'm serving as a page. Each session of General Conference is streamed live, and every day over 1,000 people participate in General Conference as a delegate, observer, or volunteer.
There is a lot going on in the plenary, but there is a lot also that's going on behind the scenes, like communications-wise and all the logistics. So we thank you very much for everyone who's helping out making this happen.
We have a very different church. We are moving forward as a different church. This is a new day.
There's a bright hope for the future and for the church as well.
We are having a new set of mindset of change for everyone to feel inclusive.
The most important thing about Methodism to me is the being able to be connected with people who are different than us and agreeing on these most important things.
I think the main thing is we continue to reach souls for Jesus Christ. That always has been part of our Methodism, our connection.
It's a delight to watch the United Methodist Church move with confidence and energy and boldness into the future. To me, that's what it means to be UMC.
Yes, we are excited about our future. God is doing a new thing. There is a renewed hope and a renewed focus in the life of our church as we continue to expand our witness for Jesus Christ and live into our mission of making disciples of Jesus Christ for the transformation of the world.
Well, welcome everyone to St. James Church. My name is Emanuel, Cleaver III, and I'm the pastor here. And I want to begin by opening us up in a word of prayer. So let's pray together. Loving, merciful, and mighty God, we give you thanks for this day. We honor you. We praise you for this time of gathering, learning, information. We pray that you bless what we do so that what we do truly glorifies you. In the name of Jesus, we pray. Amen. So how this evening is going to go, we're going to share who we are and the legislative committees that we worked on, and then talk about some of the major legislation that passed, and then we'll open it up for questions so that you can ask and they will answer. Okay, so just to begin, I worked on a committee called Faith and Order, and for how General Conference worked, for those who don't know, legislation is sent in, I don't know how many pieces, had to be thousands, 1,100 pieces of legislation, and they're divided up in committees. And so me being on Faith and Order, we got a lot of the theological petitions. Some of it had to do with removing harmful language in the Book of Discipline. We also had discussions about a catechism for the United Methodist Church and a document called Sent in Love. These were some of the major pieces in Faith and Order, called Sent in Love, that really explains the nature and purpose of the church. So one of the major things that I worked on being a part of the connectional table, and a big piece of legislation is called regionalization. And regionalization was passed, and it still has to go through every annual conference, 2/3 aggregate vote. And what regionalization does, one, it makes it so that the United Methodist Church is no longer U.S. centered. I think you saw in the video, it talked about that what the church has been is really just a United States-based church with satellites all over the world, just because of how we're structured. But regionalization changes that. So outside of the United States, there are what's known as central conferences, and even that language is being removed, so they will no longer be called central conferences, because central conference has it's harmful language if you know the past in terms of United Methodist Church and the segregation that happened within our denomination from 1939 to 1968. So outside of the United States, we have these conferences, and Africa, Europe, Asia, and they were able to adapt the Book of Discipline to fit their specific context. So some of the things that other conferences outside the United States have done, creating their own hymnal and ritual book, organizing conferences in a different way, annual conferences, and the local church. The United States has not been able to do that because we have what's called jurisdictional conferences. Outside of the United States, there are no jurisdictional conferences. There are central conferences. So we elect bishops in our jurisdictional conferences, but if there was something that may be specific to the United States, it would still have to go to general conference, which meant those outside the United States would be talking and dealing with issues that have nothing to do with them. So regionalization will allow the United States to do what other conferences outside of the United States, what they've been doing since 1968, to adapt the Book of Discipline so that it fits our specific context, which means we can adapt it so Annual conferences can be restructured, local church. The list goes on and on. It is a beautiful thing. So now, just to make the United Methodist Church very simple, we'll have annual conferences, jurisdictional conferences, now we'll have regional conferences, and then general conference. The jurisdictional or the regional conferences, those elections, people who are sent to regional conference, those delegates will be elected the same way jurisdictional and general conference delegates are elected. You all know how general conference and jurisdictional delegates are elected? Not everybody. Okay. So at annual conference, I know. I knew regional, it would come to this. So every conference, and we are Missouri, elects delegates to send to jurisdictional and general conference. In Missouri, we elected 12, 6 clergy and 6 laity, and then of course we have alternates. And so every conference does that. And so we will elect delegates for regional conferences now. What this does is one of the bishops in the sermon, and thanks Trista for reminding me, that what this means is we are one in mission, not necessarily one in rules and regulations. It will depend on the region you're in. What is important in the United States may not be important in the Philippines. What's important in the Philippines may not be important in Eurasia. So that is one of the blessings, I believe, that came out of General Conference, but it's not over because that now has to be passed, as I said, at every annual conference. So it won't take place 25, 26, because some of the
Elections have to be done, or voting will be done by the end of 25.
So, yes, so we are still a ways out because annual conferences happen many times depending on where you are in the world. That's sort of a recap about regionalization. Is there anything else I need to say? And if you have questions, please remember we'll have those at the end, so just make note and I'll answer those the best I can if you have questions about regionalization.
Yeah,
Yeah. There's one other piece of legislation that perhaps 90% of the delegates who left General Conference have no idea that actually happened. And that is, we voted to set up a study that Strengthening the Black Church for the 21st Century will do for reparations for African Americans in the United Methodist Church. It passed, it snuck through there because it was on the consent calendar, which every day we're given a consent calendar, and there's so much stuff on there, I think it just slid in there. So that is something else that came out of General Conference.
Cool. So that's just the beginning. Probably one of the most complex pieces that was passed this year. I'm Steve DeWild, and have a lay. So we have clergy and we have laity as members. So you're not getting it up here. There we go. So Steve DeWild, a lay delegate. The one thing that is interesting about conference in general this year is normally delegates are elected 1 year before. So for us, this journey started in 2019, and we were all working really heavily on stuff, fall of 2019 and beginning of 20, and then COVID and the cancellation of the General Conference for 2020 was canceled. So our 4-year period has turned into 5 years, and if there's a special call in 26, who knows what's going to happen with this.
Do not speak those words.
We're not.
Okay, we all would like to, because we've done good work, and we want to continue. The one thing that I thought was exciting about conference this year was the amount of just open discussion. There was not yelling and screaming, and there were not threats. it was much more the church, and it was much more Christian conferencing. The committee I was on was Church and Society. Church and Society was responsible for basically all the pieces of the revised social principles. So that nice little book that you saw in the video that the guy was paging through for the revised social principles, that early document has been around for 7 years in publication and it's been worked on for 12 years. It was a worldwide project with thousands of people involved, 40-some writers and reviewers on it across the planet. So it's probably the most globally applicable social standards that we've ever produced. It was divided into 3 sections jurisdictionally. So Church and Society 1, 2, and 3, and we all had different portions of it. But one of the big things that came out of all that was the correction and revamping of language throughout the entire discipline. And if ever any of you are real new term we love, metho-nerds, you're into Methodism and you're total nerds. Every purple marker in my current 2016 Book of Discipline has something that had to be removed or changed. So in 1972, about 4 years after the merger with EUB, the first negative language was added to the book. The discipline historically had been neutral on all language. No groups were lifted up over other groups. No groups were pushed down over other groups. And in 72, the incompatibility clause, which is the shorthand for some verbiage that was added. And it was added in my book in the most strange and interesting places. There are sections that refer to all people of sacred worth, followed by a statement that says, and homosexuality is incompatible with Christian teaching. So it immediately created a second class of any Methodists if they were queer. So one of the big changes this year was actually neutralizing that language. So it actually in some ways pushed the discipline back to what it was in pre-72, where no group is lifted, no group is put down. But to correct that, as the pastor to my right pointed out, is like pulling a thread within the discipline. And once you pull one part, you have to make sure everything else is corrected to align with the changes in that language. So that was probably it. That part touched, I think, every committee that we were on. But we had the biggest pieces that were within the social principles in several places. The other thing that was neutralized within the policy was to neutralize the language around marriage. Before, it's always been stated that marriage was a covenant between a man and a woman, and that's been used harshly across the church. It's not a good thing to use church language as weapons, and it's been weaponized. That language was neutralized so it worked globally, as marriage is now defined as a covenant between two people of faith. That language was chosen because that can work equally well in the United States or in Africa, where some of them are more conservative. Brothers and sisters are, primarily due to countries that make it illegal or have issues that, from the government level. On the floor, discussions do happen. And when that was up for, because the way things move through, they have to pass the judicial committees first before they go to the floor. And you've heard a reference to, there are actually 2 ways they end up on the floor. They can be an individual item that has to be debated, or they go to a consent calendar consent calendars are a grouping of legislation that passed committee by a large margin with less than 10 people voting against them. And we vote those in large blocks. There was one piece of the social principles that went to the regular calendar and was being debated. And the debate became very interesting because it was a true debate and discussion. And it came out of the central conferences that were even still concerned about that more neutralized language. And we came to an agreement that the only change was to add, at the end of two people of faith, a bracket. And then within the bracket it says, a man and a woman of consenting age, or two people of consenting age, close bracket. And it, after a long discussion, we realized it actually helps, especially our African siblings, on speaking to it, to their congregations, and it gives them some shelter from the governments in their areas. So there were some phenomenal things that came of it. The reparations piece actually came out of the committee I was on. And if you want to have fun, explain reparations to people who live in Africa. They have no idea what we insane Americans are talking about. And what makes it more complex is where you're in the room that you have to have translators for French and Portuguese to make sure that the words are coming across right. So it became an amazing discussion. And one of the things that we realized that came out of a lot of that committee work was understanding and learning, because the time we spent trying to understand their viewpoint and them trying to understand the American viewpoint. So pretty good stuff. One thing I do want to point out, I want you to hold that for just a second. They talk about what we were doing. This is what we started working on in 2019. And it grew. It birthed an entire different volume. So total on these before we got there were about 1,200 pages, and then there are additional handouts we got, which is there. So we ended up at, what was the final number we in? It's like in the 2000s.
2,334.
There we go. So, so the revised social principles will be printed in that very nice blue book form, but it also had to pass because it's also all part of the discipline. So it was exciting stuff to work on, folks. This is one of the best comment I heard was it feels like we were watching the Methodist Church become what we always thought it could be, and it was a new birth of what this church can be globally.
I do want to say, that microphone doesn't work. I think we just can't hear it here. I do want to say, although it was different from other general conferences I've been to in terms of not all the fighting, but we're still United Methodists and we still like to talk a lot.
Oh, yeah.
Constantly.
Yeah.
I mean, I would love to have a conversation with Robert about his rules, because that was a big part of the problem.
Yeah. So I'm Trista Sonker-Nicholson, clergywoman. I sat on ordained ministry. So if you read any of our goals going into conference, we had the 3 R's, right? We had regionalization, the revised social principles, and the removal of the harmful language. And though, as Steve said, the removal of the harmful language spanned a lot of different committees, a lot of that came to ordained ministry as it relates to the work of pastors and those seeking ordination, but also as it relates to marriage. And so of all the committees, I got to read the most. We actually had 177 pieces of legislation sent to us originally, and then Emanuel's team sent us additional 34 pieces of legislation to us, so thank you. Faith and Order.
We were very good at sending other legislation to other committees. We wanted to get out early, and we did.
And this is how sad it is. As he just pointed out, we like to talk, And so a few general conferences ago, they started putting a time limit on how long we could go into the night, because we were taxing the staffs of the conference centers where we were meeting. And so we, most nights, had to adjourn by 6:30. On our final legislation night, we got to extend that until 9:30. So we didn't have to adjourn that day until 9:30. And our team had a WhatsApp that we were sharing information back and forth with each other, and they were all saying, "We're done, going home. We're done, going home. I'm still here." We worked all the way till 9:30 when they had to remind us, "We're shutting you down." And so we did the most work we could do, and we did remove the harmful language in all of the places that it did appear. So that means for ordained ministry, now regardless of your sexuality, you can seek ordination and go through the wonderful process that is moving through DCOM, District Committee on Ordained Ministry, moving through the Board of Ordained Ministry, just as anyone can as they seek that movement. We also had a strengthening of the marriage language, which meant, again, kind of back to Steve's point, we wanted to honor that we are a big theological tent. And pastors have always had a right to marry who they feel called to marry, and to say no if we do not feel comfortable marrying someone. But we wanted to strengthen that language even as we removed the harmful language to say that no clergy person could be compelled or forced to oversee any marriage. And so we put that in there as well. We also were the committee that, if you were watching the floor debate, tried to scramble because there was a motion to move things through consent calendar that had a 15-vote margin. Our committee was probably the most divisive. We had 60 members, and we had a large majority of our members from the Central Conference, so we had a lot of split votes, not a lot that went on consent calendar. A few of our items did then, when the vote threshold was raised a little bit, moved on consent, and we didn't want that to happen. So our committee had to scramble to get some things removed from the consent calendar so that we could discuss them. One of those things that we had to discuss on the floor was any clergy person who has been charged since the 2019 General Conference was immediately, those charges were removed at the end of this General Conference. So we wanted to make sure that that was immediate, that those charges were dropped. And then our committee also was the committee that got to discuss deacon sacramental rights. And we wanted to make sure that that was discussed as well, because that is a major shift, and we wanted to make sure that that didn't just go through on consent, but was something that we could discuss together. So our committee actually got to do a lot of fun work. We got to know each other very well, and in fact, my committee is still working together because our legislation, since a lot of it was passed at the end of General Conference, it has not been published in the revised format that we passed. And so we're actually exchanging notes right now to make sure that all that served on ordained ministry actually has the most up-to-date information. So as you all ask questions, or as district committees on ordained ministry ask questions, or Board of Ordained Ministries ask questions, we can answer those questions as easily as possible. Oh, yes, I did. I have one more, and that is just that we also, you're going to hear from Amy a little bit about the budget. One of the things that passed the budget that may be important to some of you is we did extend the funding for the ministry study, because one thing that we have learned is we don't have a strong understanding really of the different orders that you can serve as pastors in the United Methodist tradition. And so that study is really going to dive deep into our theology behind local licensed pastors, our theology behind deacons and elders, and our theology around laity and the ways that laities can serve the church in a variety of ways. And with that came the one probably painful thing, the thing that I lament, is we also were the committee that had before us voting rights for local licensed pastors. And as part of that work, the committee decided that we were going to allow that study to continue before we took on those rights. And that was painful for me. I spoke up against that. And sometimes you speak up and you use the voice you've been given and the vote goes the other way. And I hope and pray that we will continue that discussion because it's an important one.
I'll use my own mic. Thank you, though.
Sorry. My name is Amy Thompson, and I served as a lay delegate to General Conference. I was the first elected lay delegate, so besides serving on my committee and with this group of people, I also got to attend some other committee meetings because that's just what you do when you're elected first. The committee that I served on for legislation was discipleship. So I feel like if I asked you guys to raise your hand, most of us would agree discipleship is very important. Yes. We had 40 pieces of legislation. 40. And most of those pieces of legislation were related to, when I use language alignment, it's really about changing things that used to say, and now I'm not, so we used to use the phrase young adults, and now we're using young people's network. So a lot of language alignment was really about things like that. We had a few pieces of removal, but most of our language alignment was around that. I did have the honor of hearing the presentation around strengthening the Black church for the 21st century. So their director presented their plan for their work in the coming 4 years, and so we received that and passed that along. We also received the Native American ministry plan, and so again, kind of in a summary of both of those plans, information related to equipping leaders, leadership development, church growth, and so ministry areas, social justice areas for those two ministry areas, and so that was lifted up in those two plans. And the other piece is around the General Board of Discipleship submitted several pieces of legislation, again, kind of giving them space to do some work. So we did give them permission to work on how we engage people in discipleship formation. So stay tuned for what may come out of discipleship ministries. I know. I think that's about it that came out of my committee. So my committee was done way early. I had a little bit of, I was very supportive though. I came and listened to the debate in Trista's room because I heard, because when you're walking the halls, you hear things, and I heard, gosh, there's some stuff going on in ordained ministry, so I was like, I'm going to go visit that one. I did leave, though, to have dinner after there, but I did not stay for that. But I do want to lift up a couple of pieces of key legislation that was passed that is not in my area. We do not have anybody here from financial administration, but I will be happy to share that. So for clergy in the room, your defined pension plan will be ending in 2025, and you will move to what they're calling Compass, and so that's an account-based plan that will begin in 26. I liken it to the lady there in the room. You have a 401k, so clergy pretty much now are going to move into alignment with corporate and businesses and organizations. So there will be information forthcoming about how that plan will function, but basically as an account-based, you will have some choices around how that's invested in things, but also you have the opportunity to contribute. Your employer, which would be the church, the conference will be contributing a matching contribution up to 4%. There's also some caveats too around helping with student debt and helping kind of balance that you're paying student debt, but also how do you save money at the same time. And then also the other piece is looking at some pay equity as far as being able to, not necessarily your salary equity, but the contribution equity will help with that discrepancy that often happens in retirement between, again, a licensed local pastor, ordained clergy, or a deacon. And based on where your appointments are. So that there will be some clarity around that. So that sounds very promising. So the budget. It's always a great thing to talk about, isn't it? So the general conference budget gets apportioned to annual conferences into the central conferences. And so every conference pays whatever their percentage of that is that's distributed to them. And so the body of General Conference actually approves the budget that GCFA, the General Council on Finance and Administration, they submit that to us. And so the legislative committee worked on it, GCFA worked on it, and then it came before us on the last day. Also, the last thing you do before you leave is budget work. And it was passed with much debate. The budget proposed is a 43% reduction in the previous quadrennium, which would have been from 26 to 2020. And so it's around a 43% reduction. So most general boards have, well, all the general boards have taken a cut. Other funds have taken a cut. And the discussion became how much of a cut is too much. And so the debate became on the floor about what's the base rate. And the base rate is what gets charged to general conferences. So after, again, Robert's Rules of Order, that can be very positive, but also very, I mean, it holds your hand, like you have to really work a lot. We had amendment after amendment. We ended up with that the base rate that will be followed for 24, 25, yes, is 2.6%. And then it would increase to 2.9% in 26, 27 if the collection rate is at 90%. So that means that conferences would have to pay in their portions, and if the portion gets to over 90% towards the budget for that year, then that percentage would go up, so that then general boards and other organizations would receive a budget increase for the last 2 years of the quadrennium.
And we usually pay how much in Missouri? What's our percentage?
Like how much do we pay?
88, you said 88?
Oh, so yeah. So in the Missouri Annual Conference, we apportion out our own Missouri Annual Conference budget. We tend to pay around anywhere from 85 to 88%. We've had higher years. We've had 90% before, but so the average, I always say, is around 87, 88%. So we're just giving you context. So can the general church pay out 90%? We'll see. I don't know. Anything else about the budget? I feel like that. I heard that normally the budget takes all day. We managed, even though it felt like it was a long time, we managed to get through it in 2 hours. Like we had it done before lunch on Friday. So that was exciting.
The budget was also an extra meeting I had to, because GCFNA met with Connectional Table. So that was a long evening. But yeah, a lot of discussion around the budget.
Yeah. And I would say this, when we say 43% reduction, those of you within your church leadership team's like, wow, that's a big hit. They've been preparing for this for the last 4 years. So it wasn't like, oh my gosh, by the beginning of 25, they have to cut staff, and they've been working towards this by not filling positions and looking at ministries. So while it is a huge number, it's also something they've been preparing for. Yeah, I think questions.
All right, any questions?
Now you've had your polity class, so we can answer questions.
Come to the mic if you could, please. Come to the mic if you could, please.
I just need to read it so I can ask it. Can you explain the part regarding affirming and entering into a full communion relationship with the Episcopal Church, please?
Yeah, well, it's a big deal. It is a big deal. So I'll try to explain it. That was not my committee. I think that happened behind the scenes. But really, we're in communal partnership with those denominations who theologically align with us. And so those conversations have been ongoing with the Episcopal Church. But part of what made that possible was the work we did prior to this conference, I could give you a really pretty answer, or I could just give you the plain answer. This means that now if you are United Methodist and you go to a Episcopal church, the ELCA, no, the Episcopal Church, sorry, in America. I'm not, sorry, Lutherans, we're already with you. They accepted us a long time ago. We could preside over their table as ordained ministers. So if you're ordained, and so that allows more cooperative ministries to take place, especially in some rural areas where some joint ministries are already happening in unique ways. That just increases the people that we can be in full communion with. Does that help?
I'm a money person, so when I hear 43% reduction, I want to know what that means for the local church in terms of apportionments.
Yeah. So the General Conference will apportion the Missouri Conference our amount. So don't quote me on all of this. There's a fancy little formula they use, and it has to do around our churches and your church budget and income. And so whatever you turned in for your end of the year stats, like that gets to our GCFA people, and then they use that. And so when the General Conference sends us our percentage of what we're supposed to pay, then that gets distributed to our local churches. And then you guys will send that to us as you pay apportionments, and then the conference sends that into General Church. I did not ask Nate before we left, but I know with like the original proposed budget that he said we would not notice much change per se, unless you just have a great windfall in your local church, take in a ton of money. Is anybody going to do that here?
There's always the hope.
We always pray and hope, don't we?
Amen.
Would you explain a little more thoroughly? Is there only the regionalization element that needs to be ratified by the annual conferences? And exactly how does that happen? Does each annual conference have to provide 2/3 of a positive vote? Is that how that works?
Yeah, there are some other pieces. That's the big one. But yes, it has to go through every annual conference. That's why we're looking at a year plus out. The other pieces, I
think there were 3 other pieces that we passed that we're changing the Constitution to require. I think there were 3 other pieces of legislation. That's a great question that we should know. But again, there's so much. Do you think it's more than 3? Regionalization is 8, isn't it? Or 6? It's 8, and I think there's 3 other. I think there's 11 total.
There were, and he's going to correct me if I'm wrong, there were actually 8 separate petitions to put regionalization in place, but only one of them, I think only one of them touched the first 60 paragraphs, which is the Constitution. So it's that one piece that has to be ratified. And then the other 3, I think, were smaller and potentially less controversial.
So when it comes to the other R's, regionalization is the constitutional one that has to be passed. Mm-hmm. The other R's were removed because they are not a part of our Constitution. And some are immediately. In fact, that was part of the legislation that we passed. We had changed the wording to say upon adjournment of the postponed General Conference. And so it went in effect immediately. There are other pieces that will go into effect on January 1st of 2025. So like the deacon sacramental rights, that was not amended to say immediately. So that will be later. And so the pieces that do not have the constitutional ramifications do not have to go before the annual conferences.
And I would piggyback too. I do remember one of the changes was a word change, but requires a constitutional vote. And we actually have already made that change in our standing rules within the annual conference. I mean, we'll still have to go through the voting process, but that's something we've already actually adopted here in the Missouri Conference. And we did that several years ago. Yeah. So.
Yeah, and on that question, the revised social principles will all be in effect on January 1st because they never had, we put those through as written. Correct. So they didn't have that language change at the end to make each of the petitions active at the end of the conference.
Yes. Yes.
Every annual conference, that's what she asked. Every annual conference has to vote and pass them, yes.
I may be able to shed a little bit of light on
Yes,
that.
our conference secretary.
Yeah.
Yay!
Yay. So among what we call it, the gaggle of annual conference secretaries, at least within the United States, what we're all hearing now is that we're not going to be voting on the constitutional amendments until 2025. Correct. There was some question about some of the language that Gary used that we may have been able to vote this year, but I don't know of any conference so far that's going to vote this year, but it's an aggregate of 2/3. So most of the annual conferences are going to be using this next calendar year to do a lot of education regarding regionalization, so that it will pass by a higher margin, the highest margin possible, so that if it fails anywhere else, we still have that large aggregate margin so that it can pass worldwide.
Yeah, and along with that, thank you for that. And you should know that the General Conference wouldn't really talk to us as delegates, they would only talk to her.
That's right. This has been my favorite person for
Yes,
5 years.
so thank you for all you've
She
done.
has turned in paperwork for us. She's gotten us registered because she turned in our names, and sometimes had to do a quick turnaround because we'd get something on a Friday and it would be due the next Monday. So.
Yeah, does somebody want to explain?
So everyone has to vote. That is what it is. But when it comes to the 2/3, it's the aggregate of all annual conferences. Yeah, of the votes. So not like Missouri and Great Plains, but 2/3 of all the aggregate votes from all the annual conferences. Does that help? Don't lose hope, because what Rebecca just said is correct. In fact, none of the work that we did at this general conference would have been possible without organizing. You know, the Missouri Annual Conference organized before our elections in 2019, right? There are still groups that are that helped us organize for this postponed general conference, which is, I think, why you saw the vote total holding the way that it did. And as a policy wonk, that's what I was paying attention to. I was, yes, looking at that positive number, but I was looking at that bottom number to see, as the votes went along, was it holding? And the organization that went into this allowed that vote total to stay together. And those groups already, before we were even adjourning, were talking about, now how do we communicate regionalization so that it can be passed in different contexts? And we have already seen some articles written by folks that have left us to go to the Global Methodist Church and what they are going to do to try to prevent that from passing. And so we will be watching all of that and organizing and being clear with our own communication so that we can walk forward with hope. And so it may seem like, oh gosh, we won't ever get there. But I think this general conference actually showed us what can happen if we organize, if we communicate, if we continue to bring people along as we are engaging in these conversations. So is it going to be difficult? Yes. I'm not going to undersell that. Is it possible? Absolutely. If you ask my congregation, I did a potluck the Sunday before I went to General Conference, and I said, you know, we as a delegation, we're hoping for one of the R's. Maybe we'll get a piece of regionalization. And then when it started rolling, I'm telling you, the spirit in the room was amazing. And I said, I wish more people could have been there, because it was a healing experience after what we experienced in 2019. There was actual healing, hope, and love exchanged. And so will it be difficult? Absolutely. Do I think it's possible? Absolutely.
And to add just a little bit to that, the organizing groups, we talked on WhatsApp. Most of us have probably 3 to 4 different groups on WhatsApp, so we were getting constant communication. But I will also tell you that was beyond the U.S. delegates. A lot of the European delegates from the Central Conference in Europe were on the same apps and working with us on the same things. So this is becoming global. to ensure that the Methodist Church continues in this new direction.
Pastor Lydia, welcome. So Pastor Lydia was one of the interpreters, and she spent 2 weeks in Charlotte, and she worked, I don't even know, day and night. They had weird schedules. So welcome, and what's your question?
Thank you so much, Amy. A very short question. May I take you back to apportionments?
Of course.
Because since, we're all from local churches, that is very just important. We reduced the apportionment formula down to 2.6. The question is how, because what I translated to people was it will be calculated from the revenue, not from the budget. So I just want to be correct when I tell to my members how it will be calculated.
So how about this? The bishop's going to unpack General Conference at the beginning of Annual Conference on that Friday morning at 10 a.m. I will make sure that Nate creates a slide that will have the right wording.
Thank you.
But yes, I believe I'm speaking correctly, but we'll verify with Nate and we'll get it on a slide so everybody can see it.
Because it's a big difference.
Yep.
We budget one thing.
It is a big difference.
Right,
yes.
but we cannot meet the budget, so we take it out of the endowments or whatever were grants, but it does not happen every time. So if it's calculated from revenue, then it's our pledges and the plate, then it's much different.
Yeah, it is very different. Yep,
Thank
you're
you.
correct.
And I want to give her a personal thank you.
Yes.
She was translating in the committee I was on because we had a Russian pastor who spoke little to no English. And so she sat side by side him, a row behind me, doing instantaneous translation. Because on the floor, because there are 4 official languages we print in, but on the floor we were translating in 10 languages. So even us English speakers had to have translation devices with us all the time. But thank you.
My name's Lori, and I generally serve as a teller during annual conference.
Oh, you look familiar.
Yeah, layperson.
We know people when you wear your
We
vest.
do, yeah. Wear your red vest
My red
and we would be
vest.
like, yes, hello.
Two things. I thought the thing with the Episcopalians was they have to ratify it also.
They do, yes. But we've already seen a letter from their bishop excited about this and complimenting us.
But it said, what I read said it may not be ratified until 2027 or whenever they meet again. The next thing has to do with, this was the 2020 General Conference, so when is the 2024 General Conference?
We are thankful to say that they said this is going to count for both.
Yeah.
All right. So we won't have to vote again until 2027 for the 2028 conference.
So, yes.
Yes.
Yes. At this time, yes.
Yes.
Yes, at this time.
At this time.
Great.
Clear as mud? Yes. Adam Musto. Well, and that is part of it. And what Steve was alluding to is there is a possibility that there may be a special charge called General Conference in 2026, but that is not a given. And that's where if that is held, we would continue to have the privilege of serving.
Yes, the privilege.
It is a privilege.
It is.
All right. First, I'm going to check. Still got it all up here, baby.
Okay.
Feeling good about that. I just wanted to tell you all first, thank you guys for your years of service. I mean, when you held up them books, I mean, we all shuddered in my little section here. So thanks for continuing your work even tonight. I got 2 questions, not loaded, but I do have questions about the brass tacks of some of this stuff. And by that, I mean, I'm curious as a local pastor in Kearney, Missouri, what is the mechanism for a church, a local church, to declare their preference of marriage?
So in your wedding policy, the trustees can help you craft a wedding policy that fits your context. And so if you are watching the live feed, that did come out of my committee as well. And then someone asked for a judicial council ruling on it before we adjourned, and the judicial council came back and said, yes, that trustees have the ability to write a wedding policy for their context.
Okay. Paragraph 1503, thank you.
No judicial ruling.
Excuse me,
1503.
judicial ruling, okay?
Don't
very
get
good.
them confused. It is very confusing. Numbers fly by.
And y'all tell me if this is too granular, and I can text Trista later. Like our policy right now is about like custodial fees and table use, and do we need to generate one?
Do you need to? No.
Okay.
If that is a protection for your congregation that your trustees want to engage in, then it is in the Book of Discipline and has been in the Book of Discipline.
Thank you. So that's just within the local church's purview.
Purview, that's correct.
Very good. I'm trying to use a fancy word for my fancy friends. Okay. And then my only other question would be, what is the process or the mechanism, or what happens if the local church and the pastor do not align?
So this is where I say we have kind of, in a way, and you guys can jump on me, or anybody out there can jump on me for saying this, I think we've kind of backed into the One Church plan in some ways. So if you remember 2019, the One Church plan was the proposal where churches, conferences, pastors could make their own decisions. And in some ways, those decisions are still made on the local level. So pastors can make that decision. Local churches can make wedding policies, which remains in the Book of Discipline. The only thing that is different than the One Church plan originally proposed is actually uniformity in our language and the removal of the harmful language, and ordination rights with the removal of that. Are you tracking with me so far? And so I would say, in terms of if there's a conflict in a local church, are there any DSs in the room?
Retired
Former
DS.
Oh, yeah, but it's
Retired.
just Jim. Hi, Jim. So I would say, as a pastor that has served in various contexts, with anything that we do in our context, we have to be in conversation with our laity and be open with our communication around issues where we may not agree. But that may mean that in some contexts, you may not be hosting same-sex weddings in your congregation, but the pastor could go to the park across the street and host a same-sex wedding, because that's what the pastor's conscience has invited them to do. How's that for an answer?
And I'm going to piggyback on that with district superintendents will be a place of support to help facilitate conversations.
And that's why I wondered.
I'm just speaking from some cabinet communication, and then the other piece would be wanting to be in conversation versus facing conflict. So again, what kind of setting or what kind of support would be needed in a local church for the local church and the pastor to have those conversations, rather than either one just drawing the line. Does that make sense?
And I appreciate all this and the chance to have you all field these, and I appreciate that. And I don't necessarily speak out of my own concern, but I'm just trying to prepare for I don't think it's going to be a potluck, but we're going to have us a meeting too, and I look forward to that. And I just know that this is a bit of a different approach than maybe it's less prescriptive than we're used to. That is the genesis of my question, not necessarily concern for my own context. Appreciate you guys.
Yeah. No, I appreciate the question.
Well, and what we mentioned earlier on the goal is to go to neutral language on everything. Neutral language is never prescriptive, and it will require more dialogue. But the glorious thing we saw at conference this year is, even with our more conservative siblings, this group is willing to talk to each other. And I think that's one of the major outcomes of the entire General Conference, is that willingness to dialogue.
Oh, Evie. Yeah, maybe go to the middle one.
Don't touch the mics. Okay. This question sort of follows along with that, knowing our long-standing history with our siblings in Mozambique, and I got to see all the Facebook stuff that the delegations spent time together in fellowship. I'm curious, this question, then I have another question unrelated to that, but what were those dialogues like before and after votes and things, and what was the tenor of those relationships that were new to some of you and old to others?
Well, what I thought was fascinating because we hosted the party, and if you saw Facebook, you saw a line dance that most of us thought we would never be part of. And that was propagated or promoted by our Mozambique siblings, who are way into partying, by the way. But our party was actually after some of the voting had happened. And at least from my perspective, we didn't feel any animus from it. And what I think is really fascinating, if you look at the general conferences a little broader than just Mozambique, some of those are more conservative areas because Africa is very diverse. Africa is not monolithic. And there were speeches on the floor for things that were driven by the central conferences. So a lot of the for and opposed that we heard back and forth on one day, I thought was fascinating. I think some of it was on Friday, was from all Central Conference delegates. So 3 delegates from the Central Conferences in Africa were speaking against, and 3 were speaking for. And it was the most amazing thing from an extremely pasty white American to see, that it broke that image that a lot of U.S. churches have, that Africa is monolithic. No, not at all. And there were some very positive things said afterwards, and I think you heard one of them in the video about the ratification. So we didn't see tons of pushback except for some really conservative groups that were there, but they didn't hide it. They actually talked to it when they were talking for or against.
I would say there was a letter that came out, I don't know if you all read that was supposed to be on behalf of all the African delegates, however only 4 of them signed it. It was actually created by someone who was in the GMC, but there was another African delegate who responded or countered what they had said. So like Steve said, Africa is not all in agreement on everything. And so the partnership with Mozambique, I think, is still alive, strong, and well, and we had a good time.
And I was going to add that relationship started even before we landed in Charlotte. We've been praying for them at every one of our meetings. We had their pictures before us and had prayer partners, and so those relationships actually were built over time, not just there on the ground, but it was great to be together.
And we knew their committee assignments, and so a layperson, I actually had 2 lay people, one from Mozambique, Southeast and South, and so they were on my committee. So again, helping them find, when you're in a big convention center and things are in English and you speak Portuguese, on all the convention center signs, and I would say too, we did have some conversations up front with them about their feelings about the legislation, so that we could understand where they were coming from, and we did our best to also. So they voted on the compass, they voted on the retirement plan that doesn't even apply to their region, but they didn't understand. And so again, we provided some education to help them understand the pros and cons, the benefits. That way they could still be an informed voter, even though it didn't apply to them.
One thing I would love to share is the hotel I was in was right across the street, and one morning when I was heading over, the Liberian delegates were sitting right in front of us. And I was crossing the street with the pastor. And the thing that makes it easy for them, they speak English. And And he made a comment to me as we were going across the street. And he said, you know, everything we've passed so far I don't think is problematic for us. And then he pointed to the one that we just added, kind of the parentheses, and he said, and the small compromise we did the other day makes it even easier for us. So he also made the comment, there are those among our group who are more conservative, without naming the groups they align with. He said, but that's not all of us. And that came from a group that I thought was one of the most conservative groups on the floor, and I heard that from one of their pastors. It was an amazing confirmation that we were doing things right.
My other question was more practical. What were the other committees served on by our Missouri delegation, by those delegates that aren't here? I just don't know what all the committees are.
So we had a committee person on, so we had 12 delegates and there are 14 committees. So we had someone in every room except for Independent Commission and Global Ministries. So our alternates served in that way. So each room had a area marked off for those that were actually voting members of that committee, and then there was an observer section. So our alternates went into those two rooms to hear conversations so they could report that back to us. But yeah, so Church and Society has 3 committees: financial administration, judicial administration, faith and order, discipleship, ordained ministry, general administration, higher ed, and superintendency. Yeah, I'm missing a lot. Oh, conferences. I don't know. Someone should have counted. This is what would this is why you don't work past 6:30, because you start to lose track of things. I'm missing some couple because that's not enough people. Oh, local church. Sorry, I forgot about local church. Local church. So yeah, we had representation in every committee but the alternates served in that role for us. Yeah.
I can't believe that you had to check your bald spot in the camera.
I saw you on TV.
Is that the thickest head of hair in the conference?
We saw you on TV. While we were gone, we saw you.
Thank you. I'm having trouble tracking what is like currently active, like right now, and what's going to conference and what's 2020. So if I want to do it, and my laity wants to do it, and the 2 ladies who are asking me to do it want to do it, can I do a wedding Saturday?
Yes.
Yes.
And that legislation was, I believe, amended to include at the adjournment of the postponed general conference.
Yeah, the penalty clauses that you guys took out were both that way.
Yeah, and so there was an effort to make sure that made it in as often as it could. We missed a few times, but as often as possible.
Okay, I was late getting in, but I read in the Week magazine that the United Methodist Church had divided up into 4 divisions. One would be the United States, one would be Africa, one would be the UK, and I can't remember what the 4th one is. So could you explain that to me, please?
It's still just one United Methodist Church. So there is no division. We have the United Methodist Church is all over Africa, Europe, Asia. So it's just one. There are regions, and the United States is a region of the United Methodist Church. And outside of the United States, there are regions, but it's still just all a part of the United States, or the United Methodist Church. Yeah. That's how it has been. It has been about everything's been United States, but we're all under the umbrella of United Methodist. So there's no split. We do have regions though. Right, that is governance. So we share the same mission. We just may differ on rules and regulations based on our context.
Are there any questions from the live feed? Do you know?
I've been looking, don't see anything.
Okay.
No questions. I guess you all did a very thorough job. Any final questions? Have anyone burning questions that you have? If they kept the room not so cold. It was freezing for 2 weeks. And the food wasn't, the conference food was okay. No.
Anytime someone else is cooking for me, I'm happy.
I ate at Whole Foods every day, so.
We had chicken for almost every meal. Almost. I mean, we had,
So you missed the cod?
oh, I did not eat the cod. I chose not to eat the cod and had a salad.
What they're alluding to is General Conference delegates used to get expenses for food. They got a stipend. And they changed that this year, and we did not get that stipend except for the day flying down, the day flying back, and on Sabbath. On every other day, the conference center in the very same room on the other side, so we all got our steps in, did lunch, breakfast, and dinner every day. So when you walked out of working with people, you ran right back into them in buffet lines.
All in windowless rooms.
10,000 steps a day.
With, yeah.
Yeah,
And,
10,000 steps a
and
day.
Adam, like we jokingly said before, but it's true, it's a privilege to be able to do this, right? And it's a privilege that my fellow clergy elected me to go. And I don't take that for granted. I wish everyone had the experience of experiencing General Conference, because it does allow you to see the church in a different way. And it makes polity class, which many of us called story time with Bishop Moody if you went to St. Paul, it made it come alive in a different way. And there's something beautiful, especially when we went to our subcommittees. Like Amy saw me geeking out that night. When I came back to our house, I was like, oh my gosh, I'm in a room full of people that all care about the same thing I care about, which was ordained ministry. And you're in very nuanced and deep conversation with each other about things that only a select number of people really care about, right? But you're with your people discussing these matters that do impact the church. And I was pinching myself. And then with the realization that I actually was ruling on Robert's rules before the parliamentarian would answer, and a majority of the time I was right, that's kind of gross. So that was like an awareness of, I'm not right in the head.
All of us got extremely good at Robert's rules.
I was like, that's out of order.
Yeah, if we were good before we left, we were getting into the depths of Robert rules that no committee or board that you're on will ever get to. Thank goodness. Yeah.
Oh, that's right.
One of the things that Tristan mentioned is committees. Because they're smaller than sitting on a floor with, 750 to 800 voting delegates, is because the Church and Society 1 was one of the smaller committees. We had a total of 41 assigned delegates, I know, and so our room was smaller. But what we walked out of it realizing, somebody said, how was committee? It was learning. There was not aggressive discussion. It was trying to understand why our siblings from the central conferences were thinking of it in a different way than we think of, and learning their context to how that plays in their country, or how the translation, we found certain words don't even translate properly to get a meaning across. And so the biggest thing that I took away is, if you do this right, you can learn from each other. And that's what our committees felt like. I think the biggest privilege, for all of us that were there this year, was being part of what we started talking about, is birthing a new church. Because this felt like we were part of seeing the UMC become something new that it has not been before on a global level. So it was an absolute privilege to be part of something like this year.
And I'll say, outside of the voting and the amendments and the amendments to the amendments, worship. We had several great worship experiences, great preaching, and even a love train broke out all over the General Conference floor. So I want to highlight also the worship, the diversity of worship that we experienced over the course of 2 weeks. And so that was also a blessing, to worship with people all over the world, how they worship. People all over the world, oh yeah. Join hands, join hands.
Start a love train. I would also lift up too, worship was amazing, but that is probably the other piece, that even though we talk about all this legislative work, we started our day with worship and we ended our day with devotion. And so everything was kind of, encased in those pieces, which I don't know from the past what that's been like. That's always been the practice, but then in the middle it was ickiness. Whereas now it felt like we kind of had the framing, but then within that we actually had conferencing. We had conversations and learning, but it was true conferencing.
Yeah, this was much better. My first general conference, which was in 2012, in Jacksonville, Florida. I didn't get to see any of Jacksonville. We would go till 9 and 10 o'clock. And so we did have worship at the end at 10, but it was a mad scramble to get to your hotel room because you had to be back at 8 o'clock in the morning. So this was a lot better, not going till 10 o'clock, where we could really have a proper devotion at the end. All right, well, if there are no other questions.
You want to check the light feed one more time?
Oh. No questions?
No questions.
Anybody want to close us out in prayer? Reverend Doctor?
You're the only Reverend Doctor up here.
Aren't you?
I will. Amy should pray as our lay leader.
All right, let's go to God in prayer. Let's go to God in prayer. Gracious God, first and foremost, give you thanks. Give you thanks for the opportunity to serve you. We are a room full of people that are serving you in many different ways and in many different settings. And I just give thanks for the opportunity to be in a church where we could live into that. And so I give thanks for those that have been interested and have followed and are still asking questions to understand and wanting to translate that for their local churches. I give thanks for all those that served and that prepared for General Conference, not just the delegates, but all those that went into organizing it. And God, I ask that you be with all of us as we continue to move forward and discerning what this means for us personally, for us in the local church, and for our conference. And that you would be with the leaders in our local churches and in our conference as we do move forward in the next year and a half to have more conversation, to have more votes, but also continue to work something bigger than life than we could ever imagine, so that we can truly be your hands and feet here on earth. In your name we pray. Amen.
Amen. Thanks
Thank
for
you
coming.
all for coming.